Hey folks, Brian Nato and Zweek here today to announce our new collaborative tutorial series. We're combining our creative brains to produce what we hope will be the best educational content that Titanfall 2 has seen, beginning with this, the ultimate guide to moving around in Titanfall 2. So why am I making another movement tutorial? Well, Titanfall 2 has progressed quite a bit as a speed game in the last year and a half, and I didn't really like how the other two videos were split up, so here we are. Let's keep this intro short and get right into it. First things first, this video is a movement tutorial that is focused primarily around Titanfall 2 speedrunning, but the large majority of tech you'll learn here is applicable in multiplayer as well. This video is focused around PC movement, but again, a good portion of it will still apply to console, and I'll be sure to notate specific differences. Titanfall 2 runs on a heavily modified version of the source engine, which means we have several holdovers from other source games, including things like Airstrafing and Bhopping, which we'll cover later in the video. The main thing I want you to remember when it comes to movement in this game is that everything influences everything. Titanfall 2 is a movement-based speed game, which is based and routed around momentum preservation. Getting up to high speeds in this game takes a lot of skill, and preserving it arguably takes even more. The goal for this video is to have a comprehensive piece on nearly everything related to Titanfall 2 movement, so naturally there will be a lot of content covered here. And my advice to you when it comes to digesting it all is just to take it piece by piece, and you'll notice the video is structured to accommodate that. If you start getting overwhelmed, just slow down a bit, ironically, and tackle things one at a time. Trust me. Before we even start moving, you're going to want to make sure that your keybinds are optimal and comfortable. Generally speaking, you want to stay away from just the default binds. It's really common for runners to bind things like crouch or grenade to a mouse side button, and some top runners even have jump on right click. If there's any one of these that you should rebind, it's grenade, as holding Q while trying to maneuver with WASD doesn't mesh super well. There's arguably no super optimal way to do these binds, but I suggest doing at least some experimentation to try and find your comfort zone here. Another important tip is to change crouch from toggle to hold. This one can be a little weird as they're separate binds for the same mechanic rather than an option that you toggle on and off, but I strongly recommend switching to hold crouch. And before anyone asks, no, you cannot bind scroll to jump or movement binds in this game. Titanfall 2 very specifically requires these inputs to be held for at least one tick for them to register, unlike Apex for example. So binding scroll to jump or using a custom config or macro to set plus forward is off the table and banned. And it's better this way, trust me. And for you controller players out there, use Evolved. Every high level controller runner uses the Evolved layout. Alongside bindings, I'm also going to suggest that you lower your mouse sensitivity. The majority of camera movement in Titanfall 2 is going to be slow and smooth with some flicks here and there, so I suggest a lower overall sensitivity. I myself run on 650 DPI 2.0 in-game Sens. If that seems way too slow for you, or maybe you just don't have a ton of space to move your mouse around, try 800 DPI 2.5 in-game, maybe like 1000 DPI max, which is what I used to use for a very long time until I dropped it even further. I understand that for a lot of folks these days, especially those of y'all that sweat competitive FPS games, you're already going to have a pretty low sens, maybe even lower than mine, so this might not even be necessary for you. Alright, so we're going to work from the ground up essentially here over the course of this video. Let's get started with slides and hops. The main mechanic that's going to contribute to pretty much all of our ground-based movement is sliding. Sliding occurs when we hold crouch at traveling basically any speed faster than walking, so around 15 kilometers an hour. Once we're over that speed threshold, we're going to get what's called a slide boost, where we actually gain speed momentarily up to a certain cap, which will then slowly dissipate the longer we slide. It's most common to initiate a slide boost out of a sprint or a sprint jump, as both easily get us over that speed threshold. Now, you can't just sprint, slide over and over, as there's what's known as the slide boost timer in this game. The slide boost timer will prevent us from getting another slide boost for around 2 seconds after the initial boost. So this is something you'll have to take into account when you're trying to get back up to speed after a mistake. However, it is possible to preserve the momentum that we get from a slide boost. The most basic form of higher level movement in Titanfall 2 are slide hops. A basic slide hop can be performed by initiating a slide boost and then jumping every time you touch the ground while keeping that crouch input held. Assuming you're timing your jumps correctly, this allows you to maintain a decent level of speed for pretty long periods of time. Keep in mind that the longer you slide, the more speed you're going to lose every time you hit the ground. You're only going to get that one slide boost at the beginning of a movement string, so preserving that momentum is the name of the game here. Getting the feeling for this is going to be key to a lot of movement strings in the game, so I recommend having at least a minimal grasp on this before we move on. You can also do traditional bunny hops or B hops like in other source games. B-hops are considerably more niche than slide hops and are actually falling a bit out of favor due to modern day prevalence of half slides and extended slides, which we will cover later. But they're still a good tool that you'll want to have in your kit. B-hops occur when you jump immediately after touching the ground from a standing position during a movement string. The timing for it is much tighter than slide hops, but they do have some benefits. B-hops occur from a standing position, which means that you naturally gain more height than a traditional slide hop, since you're jumping from a higher vertical position. B-hops can also allow for tighter turns and routing due to the high friction and slowdown that occurs when you're touching the ground from a standing position. Let's move on to the largest and deepest aspect of Titanfall 2 movement, Airstrafing. Just like other Source Engine games, Airstrafing is a massive part of this game's movement. There's obviously a lot of math and calculations that go into exactly how Airstrafing works, but let's break it down into the simplest definition that gets the point across clearly. Airstrafing is based on the concept that you go farther and move faster by subverting the speed cap that you normally experience when you hold forward by holding left and right instead as you move through the air. If you pay attention to the input overlay, you'll see that I'm very specifically holding A and D as I move through the air, and pairing that with turning my camera at a specific speed. What Airstrafing allows us to do is really pretty simple, but also really powerful. Move in a curve through the air. We can use this to turn corners, clear otherwise impossible gaps, navigate through tight hallways, etc, etc. You'll notice some differences with strafing in Titanfall 2 if you're coming from other Source games. The air acceleration value in Titanfall 2 is much lower than, say, Half-Life 1 or Half-Life 2, and because of that we'll be strafing a lot slower in this game, most of the time at least. This means that if we move our camera too quickly, we'll actually lose speed instead of gain it, so learning the proper speed to move your camera at is key. My advice? Watch how other runners do it, like in this video, and learn through trial and error. So, how do we incorporate strafing into some of the tech that we've covered already? If you've never done any strafing in other games before, it's normal for Airstrafing to feel very unintuitive when you first give it a shot. The easiest way, in my opinion, to begin incorporating strafing into slide hop strings is to do it step by step. Try sprinting, jumping, then holding left or right, and just slide hopping in a straight line while keeping those left or right inputs held. This will allow you to get a feel for holding left and right while jumping. Once you're comfortable with that, try moving your camera in the direction you're pressing in a slow curve. This is Airstrafing in its simplest form. When you want to switch strafe directions in the middle of a slide hop string is when things get more complicated. And this is the first example of movement being different whether you're on controller or keyboard. You'll notice a lot of straight line movement in Titanfall 2 involves strafing back and forth in a slaloming pattern, as this is the best balance between having a tight line from point A to point B and generating speed via strafing. Aside from the actual strafe angles themselves, the input timing is the most important thing in these movement strings. The correct timing to swap input directions occurs either right before you land from a jump or during the moment you land itself. Why do you have to swap at this point? Well, technically you could swap directions earlier, but then you would incur what is known as Strafe Lurch. Strafe Lurch is one of Titanfall 2's most interesting movement quirks, and one that really separates it from other Source games and other games in general. Strafe Lurch is a small but jarring lurch that occurs when you press a movement direction within 0.4 seconds after jumping. We'll spend a lot of time later going over how to harness this, but for the moment let's talk about the main downside. Strafe Lurch causes you to lose speed. This is why you need to wait to input strafe directions during slide hop strings. If you're to swap directions directly after jumping, you'd be taking small movement speed penalties every single time. As a note before we continue, I want to stress that Strafe Lurch can occur after every jump. This means wall jumps, double jumps, slide hops, everything. The only time Lurch doesn't occur when we go airborne is after a slide or fall from a ledge. That said, we actually do have tech to prevent Lurch at every juncture, which again we'll cover later in the video. As I mentioned earlier, Strafe Lurch is the biggest difference between strafing on a keyboard and strafing on a controller. Controller does not incur Strafe Lurch ever. This is because directional inputs are coded differently depending on whether you're using digital inputs to move, such as keyboard keys or face buttons, or analog inputs, such as joysticks. You can do some binding shenanigans for a controller on PC where you bind keyboard keys to the D-pad or paddles, which are digital inputs, but traditional stick strafing is always going to be lurchless, and this isn't necessarily a bad thing in all cases. Moving without lurch for free is a considerable boon to controller movement, and allows controller players to move in ways that keyboard players have to work much harder to emulate. This means, unless you do the D-pad or paddle bindings I mentioned, you can't take advantage of lurch. To be crystal clear, controller players, keep this in mind when I'm talking about using lurch or preventing lurch. You prevent lurch for free, but you can't take advantage of it unless you do specific binds using controller on PC, so console cannot take advantage of lurch at all. So how do you harness Strafe Lurch, and how do you avoid it? Let's talk about the two most straightforward variants of that now, and we'll cover the rest later. Tap Strafing is arguably the most straightforward way to take advantage of Strafe Lurch. Like I mentioned earlier, we can't strafe very fast in Titanfall 2, which means things like quick 90-degree turns are a non-starter. However, Tap Strafing allows us to use Strafe Lurch to do exactly that, quick, sharp turns with minimal speed loss. It vastly expands our navigational abilities and will undoubtedly become one of the most important tools in your kit. So how do we do it? Tap Strafing is performed by rapidly tapping forward during a strafe. We can stack multiple lurches during the window that Strafe Lurch occurs. So by strafing left or right and tapping forward, or W, several times, we're essentially lurching at a 45-degree angle multiple times over, and these rapid lurches allow us to achieve these tight turns. The easiest way to get the hang of this is to begin a slide hop string while strafing left or right, and then tapping W 1 or 2 times after one of the hops. You'll immediately notice the lurch, and you'll be given an idea of how this can be used throughout the run. The number of times you tap will always be dependent on what the route requires. There are dozens of routes and strats throughout the game where I use 1, 2, or even 3 or more taps if I can manage, and you'll learn this as you go. Now let's talk about a practical way to avoid lurch. There are many scenarios where we want to avoid lurching to either maintain more speed, since lurch causes us to lose speed, or keep a better line, since lurch causes us to lurch in a direction. And the blanket term for the tech that facilitates this is no lurch or lurchless tech. You'll hear both of these terms used pretty interchangeably. From here on out, we'll be covering a lurchless variant for a tech whenever we introduce it, but for now, let's begin with the most beneficial one, lurchless double jumps. The basis of what lurchless double jumps allow us to do is fairly simple to understand. They allow us to double jump without incurring lurch, which means we can spend more time strafing and prevent any speed loss from lurch. A traditional double jump input would look something like this. Jump, strafe, release strafe, press forward, jump, release forward, press strafe again. See the issue here? We're spending a considerable amount of time not strafing and incurring lurch when we strafe. So how do we prevent this? As you'll see throughout the video, generally speaking, lurch occurs when we press an input, and no lurch tech occurs when we release an input. It's always going to be a button press that incurs lurch, and if we can strafe without pressing keys but releasing them, that's how we're going to avoid it. To perform a lurchless double jump, you need to press the strafe key opposite to the direction you're already holding and double jump at the same time as that key press. So if you're strafing left, press right and double jump at the same time, and vice versa. Again, you want to press the jump key at the same time that you press the opposite directional key. Then release a directional key to keep strafing. If this sounds confusing, reference the input overlay for a better understanding. You can use this to either swap strafe directions or maintain your current one. This will inevitably feel really weird at first, but trust me when I say that this is the most important variation of this tech to understand. Obviously, your double jump and strafe key presses want to be as fast as possible, because when you're holding both left and right at the same time, you're not going to be strafing at all. And that execution speed will come with time and practice. A small note, you can use a similar input order to prevent lurch during slide hop strings, which allows you to change direction without waiting to hit the ground again during a slide hop. If you can believe it, we actually made it this far in the video without talking about walls and the many ways we interact with them in this game, which is incredible stuff. Wall tech is very important, and we have like 100 different ways that we can touch and jump off of them. Let's begin with a general overview of the rules of the wall. Nearly any time you approach a wall, and with few exceptions, your camera will tilt slightly and the player view model reaches a hand out to touch the wall. This is described as the lean in animation, and it'll be really important to some tech that we'll cover later on. There are only 2 scenarios in which you can grab the same wall that you've just jumped off of. 1, you can re-grab a wall if you touch it at a lower vertical point than the initial jump from it. And 2, you can re-grab a wall if it has a curve to it, specifically one of 25 degrees or greater. You'll see several strats throughout Titanfall 2 that make use of exploiting these rules, and we'll cover some specific ones later. Some other quick notes, you can wall run on a wall for 1.75 seconds before the game kicks you off it, and the speed of a wall run caps out around 28 to 30 kilometers an hour depending on a couple factors, with a regular wall jump giving you around a 10 to 11 kilometer an hour speed boost at max wall run speed. And lastly, you always have to be holding forward to wall run. With those rules covered, let's dive in. The first thing we're covering here isn't exactly a piece of tech, but more so a general philosophy around strafing following a wall jump. I'm talking about what's called the wall jump arc. When you jump off a wall, you're sent at a diagonal angle away from it, and the wall jump arc refers to a strafe back toward the original direction of the wall you jump from, which naturally takes you in an arcing pattern and provides the most speed and straight line distance following most any jump from a wall. If you pay close attention, you'll see the wall jump arc all over the place in Titanfall 2 speedruns, especially for tricks that require clearing long distances following a wall jump, such as kill room skip for example. This is a great place to talk about the first bit of lurchless wall tech, lurchless wall jumps. I mentioned earlier that no lurch tech is performed by releasing keys rather than pressing them, so how does that apply here specifically? During a wall run, press the directional input that faces in toward the wall you're running on, and then jump from the wall and release the forward input that you were holding for the wall run. This prevents lurch because you've essentially pressed the strafe key early while attached to the wall where the input doesn't affect you, and you're able to begin a strafe simply by releasing the forward input that you were using to wall run. This is really a pretty easy tech to learn with a lot of uses all over the run, and it plays into some other wall boost tech that we'll cover later on. Now let's talk wall kicks. Most of the time, when you interact with the wall, you'll want to jump from it instantly, rather than running on it for a sustained period of time. An instant jump from a wall that results in a net speed gain is called a wall kick. And for being such a simple tech on the surface, there is an incredible amount of depth behind it that we'll attempt to tackle here. Let's go over the basics. Titanfall 2 runs at 60 ticks per second, which means that the game essentially updates itself 60 times in a second. A wall kick must occur within the first 5 ticks of touching the wall, and the faster you perform that jump after making contact with the wall, the larger boost you're going to get, with the fastest of these being a 1-tick wall kick, referred to commonly as a firstie. It's possible to do a fast wall jump and maintain your speed, but a wall kick usually refers to when you gain speed following an instant jump from a wall, though you'll hear that term thrown around pretty loosely among runners when just generally referring to jumping off a wall as fast as possible. An easy way to help yourself get acquainted with wall kicks is to use the lean in animation I mentioned earlier. This is a super telegraphed animation that lets you know almost exactly when you're going to touch the wall, and a lot of top runners, myself included, develop wall kick muscle memory based on this animation in conjunction with just visually looking at how close we are to the wall itself. Wall kicks are also extremely dependent on the angle you take on approach to the wall, as well as the direction you're looking when you make the jump input. For the fastest wall kicks, you want to have the most shallow angle possible as you approach, while also looking in the general direction that you want to jump. You can see from the video here just how stark the difference is on sharp versus shallow wall kick angles. The key to adjusting and tuning these angles as you approach a wall is largely dependent on your strafing, both in how you take advantage of lurch and how you work around it. The angle you're facing as you jump plays a large role too, as it directly influences where you're traveling immediately following the jump itself. So looking where you want to go is both intuitive and the correct play here. The difficulty in wall kicks lies in consistency. There are dozens of routes in Titanfall 2 that rely on chaining multiple wall kicks together in succession, and missing a single wall kick usually means you have to completely adjust how you're moving through that segment. The most punishing and common wall kick miss that you'll see is early inputs. Titanfall 2 has no input buffer whatsoever, so if you press jump even 1/100th of a second too early before you touch the wall, the game isn't going to give you that jump input, and the friction of the wall will quickly bring your speed right down to 0. At this point, I would hope you formed the question in your mind, okay Brian and Zweek, how do we do wall kicks without lurching? Well, I'm glad you asked, because it's a big one. Keep in mind this tech is arguably a bit advanced for a beginning player, but familiarizing yourself with it and its benefits at a bare minimum can only benefit you in the long run. And don't worry, we'll get back to some simpler stuff right after this. So, no lurch wall kicks. No lurch wall kicks are commonly referred to as strafe kicks, and there are a number of different ways you can input and perform them. Similar to lurchless wall jumps, strafe kicks are also going to involve holding left or right into the wall before performing the jump input, and then releasing forward after the jump to strafe. Simply put, a strafe kick requires 3 things: a directional input, either toward or away from the wall, a forward input, as you can't gain speed from a wall kick without holding forward, and a jump. The order of these 2 directional inputs is largely determined by the context of the route and the run. There are times when I hold strafe into the wall, then press forward and jump, and other times when I hold forward and then press strafe right before I hit the wall. And just to reiterate, you want to release that forward input as soon as possible after the wall kick to take full advantage of the lurchless strafe you've acquired. The timing for this can and will be tricky, as oftentimes when you're holding in toward a wall, you'll find that the wall is a bit more sticky, and holding away from the wall can cause you to get a little bit shoved, and will make you just not grab it entirely. There's an additional way to strafe kick that doesn't suffer from either of the 2 pitfalls I just mentioned, and it's a tech that wasn't really discovered or implemented until the start of this year. Instead of holding just left or right before a wall kick by themselves, you can actually hold both directions, kinda like a lurchless double jump. So yes, you are holding 3 directions before a wall kick: left, right, and forward. This is called a neutral strafe kick, or NSK, or Misc. It feels about as weird as it sounds, but neutral strafe kicks are arguably one of the most potent forms of Lurchless tech outside of Lurchless double jumps themselves. Holding all three directions oddly means that the game is reading it as just holding forward, so you don't get sucked into the wall, you don't get shoved off of it, and you're free to strafe either direction following the wall kick without incurring lurch. It's very potent and very powerful, and this tech has actually allowed PC players to compete with top controller times in the gauntlet, which is normally a record that has been dominated by controller play due to controllers' unique super smooth lurchless movement. This is what I meant earlier when I explained that keyboard can do the same stuff as controller, but it has to work harder for it. Before we stop talking about wall kicks, there's one more strat I want to mention, and that's what we refer to as double wall kicks. I mentioned at the beginning of this segment that one of the rules of the wall is that we can actually re-grab a wall if we touch it at a lower vertical point than when we initially grabbed it. Because of this, there are actually several strats in the run where we take advantage of this rule. The general strategy behind a double wall kick is to do a standard kick, then purposely lurch and strafe back into the wall, then kick again once that lower vertical position is reached. It can be tricky, but with enough practice you'll find it to be a bit of a rhythmic type of input. While double wall kicks can be fairly niche in their implementation, understanding them and how they work can have wide benefits when it comes to improvisation and trying to back up for another route. The strength in double wall kicks comes from the tight line that they allow you to take, and the slightly unintended paths that they allow you to travel through an area, since most of the level design in this game was based around jumping back and forth between walls. Alright, so let's tone down the tech a bit now with something that is much easier to get a grasp on. Wall bumps. In Titanfall 2, you can't crouch and wall run at the same time, so what happens when you approach the wall from a crouching position is that the game gives you a little visible bump off of the wall, hence the name. You incur minimal speed loss, and the bump actually refreshes your double jump and gives you a little bit of extra vertical height in most cases. Wall bumps, despite being a slightly more niche tech, can be implemented into routes in a plethora of ways. They are particularly useful when navigating tight corridors on levels like Blood and Rust, where touching a wall could completely mess up your momentum, and the fact that they refresh a double jump opens up several routing opportunities. Additionally, if there's ever a specific wall kick that you're struggling with, like the crane wall kick during Super Fastball for example, you can sometimes substitute a wall bump into that route to make it just a bit easier for when you're first getting a grasp on it. Now, let's introduce some tech that makes use of some of the stuff we covered earlier. We're going to explore edge boosts and end boosts here. These two forms of wall boost tech essentially give you the same boosts, but from different positions on a wall, making use of what is basically Coyote Time as you leave a wall run. In Titanfall 2 and countless other games, there's a small moment when you actually fall off the platform that you can still input and receive the jump. This grace period is known as Coyote Time. So how does that pertain to wall running and getting boost from it? The first instance we can talk about is an edge boost. An edge boost refers to a jump from the edge of a wall, usually a 90-degree corner or something similar. When you input a jump during these ending ticks as you're leaving the wall, you'll get a speed boost from the jump comparable to that of a wall kick. It's worth noting that you can do this input at any point during the Coyote Time and still receive the boost. So for a maximized edge boost, you want to jump as late as possible. And circling back to the earlier tech like I mentioned, the best way to maximize your edge boosts is to do them lurchless. And the input for this looks exactly the same as that lurchless wall jump that we touched on earlier. So if you know how to lurch this wall jump, you know how to lurchless edge boost. It really is that simple. Hold in toward the wall during the wall run, jump at the edge of the wall as you're leaving it, release forward, and strafe. End boosts give you a similar boost but at a different point in a wall run. As mentioned when covering the rules of the wall, you can only wall run for about 1.75 seconds before the game kicks you off of it. If you jump during the end of a wall run, during this period where the game is kicking you off, you'll receive an end boost. The easiest way to time this is to listen to the wall run sound and time it with the camera gradually tilting back to a straight up and down vertical position. The end boost angle is notably harsher than any of the other wall tech we've covered, so keep that in mind when performing these. End boosts are powerful, but come with the caveat of sitting on a wall for nearly 2 seconds before you can take advantage of them. However, there are actually 2 different ways you can force an end boost to occur without waiting out this timer. This tech is aptly named a forced end boost, or a FEB for short. To perform a forced end boost, you want to look slightly away and press away from the wall as you're running on it. This will force you to leave the wall run, and just like the strats previously mentioned, jumping during the period in which you're leaving the wall gives you a boost. The boost here is smaller than a traditional end boost, but still more than a regular wall jump. This tech oddly isn't possible on controller sticks, but that isn't really an issue these days, as the second, newer form of end boosting has more or less superseded the method that we just discussed. The tech we're about to cover here is all the rage in the Titanfall world right now. It actually got discovered during the weeks we were making this video, and it all relates back to pressing crouch and jump at the same time when you jump from a wall or perform a wall kick. Let's start with crouched forced end boosts, or CFEBs. As we covered earlier with wall bumps, you can't crouch and wall run at the same time. In fact, pressing crouch while wall running immediately kicks you off of it. If crouch and jump are pressed at the exact same time during a wall run, we'll receive a full end boost, rather than the abbreviated one we get with a regular FEB. Crouched FEBs are very potent, but do send you at that harsh end boost angle I mentioned before, so you'll need to take this into account when routing around them, as having to correct your angle with Lurch can quickly eliminate the speed gains the boost gave you. Another note about CFEBs, you don't want to hold away from the wall before you perform these, as the away press seemingly out-prioritizes the crouch press and will prevent any notable speed gain here. And yes, you can do these lurchless, just hold into the wall like you would for a lurchless wall jump before performing the input. Before we get into the Wallkick variation of this, let's tackle keybinds. Keybinds are vitally important to crouched wall tech, as it is essential that the crouch and jump inputs occur at the same time. I personally recommend binding space to jump, and binding either C, V, or B to crouch, whichever is most comfortable for you. This allows you to kind of lay your thumb across both inputs and slap them at the same time with very high consistency. And no, binding crouch and jump to the same key via any hardware or software is a macro, and is very strictly banned for leaderboard runs of Titanfall 2, and competitive play on that note. Some other binds top runners have used with success are crouch and jump on the side buttons of their mouse, or crouch on left click, jump on right click, space on shoot? Yeah. Okay, so crouched wall kicks, aka crouch kicks. Crouch kicks were discovered by Gauntlet phenom Zetriox as early as July 2020, but weren't fully realized until earlier this year. This tech is brand new and has completely changed the way we look at movement and routing in Titanfall 2. Mistakes are more forgiving, and everything is faster. Basically, Zetriox played an apotheosis card on the entire Titanfall 2 community. So with all that said, what are crouch kicks and how do they work? Crouch kicks combine the speed gain from a wall kick and an end boost into one potent piece of tech. By pressing crouch and jump at the same time immediately after contact with the wall, a good crouch kick can give you upwards of a 13 km/h speed boost. Just like with wall kicks, the better the timing of your jump, the more speed you get from the crouch kick itself. Oftentimes, it's beneficial to take a bad line through a segment to stack crouch kicks and generate more overall speed. This tech is substantial because of that continual speed gain and the forgiveness that it allows. Usually, at extremely high speeds, runners worry less about gaining speed and focus more on momentum preservation. This changes with crouch kicks, as they provide so much raw speed gain that continually building on your momentum is a much more realistic proposition. As well, the crouch input basically eliminates missed wall kick punishes. This is because the crouch input occurs before the wall friction has a chance to slow you down, so generally the worst thing that happens is a wall bump. I mentioned the jump angle and end boost gives you before, and that still applies here. Typically after a crouch kick, you'll need to course correct with either lurch or overstrafing, so you'll find it's a bit of a balancing act between gaining speed, preserving a decent line, and minimizing speed loss. Like everything else though, it is possible to do these lurchless, and you're going to use the same input sequences like you would with a strafe kick or a neutral strafe kick. Where and when you do this is largely determined by the context of the route and the run, as you really do need to account for that end boost launch angle. With that, we've covered the bulk of Titanfall 2's most essential movement tech. However, there are still several things we haven't even touched on yet. This next segment of the video is our foray into all the other tech that's either very advanced, niche, or just didn't have a good spot to include it anywhere else in the video. This next piece of tech might sound familiar if you've played Apex before, and it uses the same input sequencing as crouch kicks. Superglides. They are somewhat different from Apex in that they require us to be within a certain movement state at very specific points in Titanfall 2, namely at the beginning of VT and the fold weapon levels. We don't have a double jump and have increased gravity, which we'll refer to as grunt movement. Jumping and crouching at the same time out of a sprint in this grunt movement state will give you the jump as well as an instant slide boost. For a super glide, you want to buffer a sprint input, then press jump and crouch at the same time. This is generally most beneficial when coming out of a cutscene and regaining control. You can hold sprint well before the cutscene ends, then press crouch and jump very briefly after regaining control. They're another useful tool to accelerate really quickly from a standstill, although their use cases are still very limited. There are other ways we can take advantage of Lurch outside of just Tap Strafing, and they both play around with the idea of stacking Lurches in different ways. Let's begin with Tap Strafing's wacky cousin, Fzzystrafing. Fzzystrafing, discovered of course by Fzzy2j, is much more of a mashy type of strafing, as it relies on rapid single presses of one particular strafe direction to achieve the lurched strafe. When performed properly, it can allow for some really strange and wild looking strafes. Fzzystrafing is something that you can opt for in place of Tap Strafing, as they accomplish similar things, though Fzzystrafing will usually cause a bit more sharp speed loss. Fzzystrafing can be more comfortable for folks, especially when traveling at high speeds during segments like the Beacon 2 fan boosts. When learning this, you may be inclined to attempt to bind multiple binds to a strafe direction and alternate those to mash, but as we'll see with some other tech later, when you're pressing two keys that do the same thing, you cannot overlap them in Titanfall 2. Otherwise, it doesn't read the overlapped input, so figuring out a single key mashing style is most important for this form of strafing. Spamstrafing is kind of the middle ground between Fzzy and Tapstrafing. The name of the technique more or less implies what we're trying to do with it. Spamstrafing involves spamming multiple strafe keys, either in an alternating pattern or at the same time, to achieve lurched strafes. We're reaching a point here in the video where we're covering multiple pieces of tech that do very similar things, so denoting their differences gets tougher. There are scenarios where Spamstrafing can save a tenth or so over Tap or Fzzystrafing and vice versa, but the inclusion of these techs in the video is primarily to teach you what they are and how they work, and from there you can choose how you want to incorporate them into your play. Spamstrafing, like Fzzystrafing, is particularly potent when you need a lot of lurch to maneuver in the position you want to, or in tight corridors, or with high speeds. Alternating Tapstrafing, or Alt-Tapstrafing for short, is the most recent variation of this subset of tech that takes advantage of how the game reads your input directions whenever you press a button to lurch. If you hold the side direction and tap forward, you get a diagonal lurch, which is Tapstrafing. However, the same thing applies when you hold forward and tap a side direction, so alternating between these two by alternating forward and a side direction, and specifically making sure that the inputs overlap, allows you to incur lurches that are practically identical to regular Tapstrafing, but at a potentially higher frequency, as you're using two fingers to match the directions this time. To be clear, inputs can overlap if they do different things. It's when you have two inputs that do the same thing where the overlap will cause you trouble, as we'll touch more on later. And yes, all of these lurch-based strafe methods are more or less the same thing, but they are different, and that's why we've highlighted all of them individually. Like many other games, damage boosts exist in Titanfall 2. While there are various damage boosts that can be done to us by enemies and the environment in the game, every damage boost that we can inflict onto ourselves is related to an explosion, and those will be the ones we're covering here. The biggest and most common form of damage boosting are called Frag Boosts, which of course are performed with a frag grenade. There are many frag boosts that are routed into the Titanfall 2 speedrun, and the majority of them are covered in level-based tutorials you'll find for this game, and Zweek in particular has a small video dedicated entirely to this form of movement. We'll cover the main points here in a very condensed form, but you should absolutely watch Zweek's frag boost tutorial as a bit of a companion piece to this video. Generally, when it comes to frag boosting, you'll need to find the balance between placing the grenade in a spot that works into your route and putting enough distance between yourself and the frag so that the ensuing explosion doesn't kill you. You can throw the grenade at some wall or debris, or directly at your feet, or swap weapons while it's cooking to let it drop beneath you. All three have their own individual routing benefits and are used at different points of the run. Again, check out Zweek's video on this, it is epic. Next, we have EPG boosting, which you'll recognize as being identical to traditional rocket boosts in other games. The only issue here with the EPG is that the splash damage will kill you if you shoot it too close. This, unfortunately, isn't the multiplayer EPG some of y'all may be used to. The multiplayer EPG does 90 damage, where the campaign one does 110. Frankly, if you're not running all helmets, you don't really need to worry about learning EPG boosting outside of the gauntlet, but it does have limited use in Abyss Chapter 3. The trick with EPG boosting is finding the correct distance to look behind you and shoot to find that balance between the kill radius and the maximum possible boost. This can only really come from trial and error and feeling it out as you go, and again, the inclusion of this segment in the tutorial is less about giving you all the ins and outs around it, because there are several, and more about teaching you that the tech exists and giving you some examples to reference. Softball boosting is the simplest of the boosts that we'll see covered here. As of right now, the softball is used in the speedrun primarily in the Beacon Chapter 2 and 3, and it's the main way that folks do a trick called kill room skip. Unlike the previous two damage boost examples, a softball explosion won't kill you when you're at full health, which gives a lot more leniency and forgiveness in how and when you use it. The way a softball works is pretty simple. You shoot a sticky grenade at a surface, and after a brief delay, it'll explode. There's actually a chance for there to be about a 0.2 second variance when the softball explodes due to a bounce that can happen after it hits a surface, but that very rarely impacts the run in any meaningful way, especially with current kill room skip setups and tactics. While it may not seem like a big boost, every boost is going to save you around a third of a second, and if you boost enough times, that time adds up quick. The final bit of damage boosting covered here is likely one that you multiplayer folks might be a bit more familiar with, especially if you're a flag runner: Gravity Star boosting. Currently, the Gravity Star only has use in the Beacon Chapter 3 for the speedrun, but nailing these boosts has massive time slip implications, so we're covering it here. Like the softball, a Gravity Star fortunately won't kill you from full health. A gravity star always explodes roughly 3 seconds after it makes contact with the surface. It slowly rises up a few feet above the ground and makes a kind of charging up noise before it explodes. You can use both this visual and audio cue to help you time the boost. The trick here comes from how and where you choose to throw the star, factoring in your current movement speed and the distance in front of you, since you're required to wait those 3 seconds for the explosion, unlike a frag, which can cook in your hand. A gravity star can give a fairly large boost from a standstill or sprinting position, but generally you want to be moving into a gravity star at speed for the best possible results. There are very few points in Titanfall 2 where we need to cover large amounts of vertical distance quickly, but for the times we do, there is some pretty interesting tech we have at our disposal. Both of these next two techniques are certainly niche, but they're still new enough that their full routing potential likely hasn't been completely explored. First, we have spring jumps, a tech discovered by Zweek. A spring jump is essentially a really fast double jump from a standing position. To be clear, you have to do this from a standing or sprinting position from the ground. You can't do these out of a wall jump, slide hop, or a B-hop. A spring jump is performed by inputting 2 tick-perfect jumps in quick succession. The difficulty here comes from the fact that these 2 jump inputs can't overlap, so you have to press and completely release one before the next one. I specifically have 2 jump inputs bound to help with this, and other locations where I just need another jump button for whatever reason. The difference between this and a regular double jump isn't massive, but it's definitely noticeable. Zweek specifically has a few places that he uses these throughout the run, but that's about it currently. Next, we have bump launches, which make use of the wall bump mechanic that we covered earlier. The routing potential of this tech was first really discovered and used by speedrunners in the TAS, and so far we've only found a single location that's routed into the speedrun, which ironically is the same location for both any percent and all helmets, even though they're different strats. A bump launch is performed by crouching in the corner of a wall, holding a movement key in the direction of the corner, and mashing jump. As illustrated here, a bump launch can cover massive vertical distances at truly unmatched speeds. This occurs because the bump you get from the wall bump is being stacked over and over and over as you touch either wall in the corner. Unlike spring jumps, it's much easier to perform bump launches using 2 fingers on one jump input. For me specifically, I try and alternate my right ring finger and index finger on spacebar to get the fastest possible cadence. Finding the right angle to perform a bump launch can be tricky, as some corners are more finicky than others with the angle where it'll work. In certain cases, like Helmet 6 on Blood and Rust, I have a visual cue to help me find the correct angle for the launch. Way earlier in the video, I mentioned that B-hops were somewhat falling out of favor due to the prevalence of extended slides and half slides being incorporated into runners' toolkits. So let's talk about those now. An extended slide hop refers to when you extend your slide on the ground slightly before jumping again during a slide hop sequence. When you jump repeatedly in Titanfall 2, your jump height is slightly artificially reduced on successive jumps. If you extend a slide, you essentially wait out the period where your jump height would be nerfed before jumping again, and the difference is very noticeable. Extended slide hops have a plethora of uses all over Titanfall 2, both as specific routing tools and as an improvisational weapon for when mistakes or reroutes are required on the fly. It's actually pretty easy to get an extended slide hop accidentally, which more often than not could mess up your route due to the extra vertical height that you get. Half slides are basically the middle ground between a slide hop and a B-hop. While they've been known for a while, it's only for the last couple months that their use has really ticked up in the speedrun, primarily thanks to the efforts of Next Racer and Angry Space Dorito as well. A half slide is performed by pressing the crouch button as you touch the ground during a slide hop sequence. This essentially allows you to perform a slide from a standing position. You'll know if you did it right because the camera will do a sudden kind of dip as you enter the slide animation. You can chain half slides into extended slide hops as well. So why are half slides useful? Half slides are a surprisingly versatile niche routing tech that can help in 2 primary ways. Touching a surface that you would otherwise overshoot. It's not at all uncommon just to barely overshoot a surface when you're trying to maintain a slide hop sequence, especially in levels like BT7274 that have a number of high-speed sequences with very tight routing requirements. Half slides allow you to extend your legs to hit these surfaces without giving up the versatility and forgiving timing of slide hops, touching the ground earlier than you would otherwise. This second point is sort of the same as the first, but with a different usage to highlight. There are certain points where you want an earlier jump anchor point, which can mean that you manage to hit the route or line that you want. Touching the ground earlier can change the trajectory of the subsequent jump and help you land in a spot that you otherwise wouldn't be able to. The one thing that a half slide does not do on its own is give you extra height, as you're still technically performing just a slide hop, not a B-hop. The final bit of tech we'll cover before we show some movement string examples is Titan Disembark tech. Due to routing and gameplay requirements, we disembark from Titans a number of times in the run, and the first technique we can talk about is Disembark Jumps. These have been largely routed out of the run, but they're still useful to learn if you want to mess around with all helmets. A Disembark Jump is performed by pressing and holding jump during the ending of the Disembark animation. There are seemingly a number of different timing windows you can use for this, but I personally like to do it when I see Cooper's feet kind of extend in front of me and push down on the lower cockpit of the Titan. The resulting jump you get is pretty massive, and you'll have a double jump after it as well. And as a small note before we continue, the timing and animation for this is like completely different in multiplayer, so you're on your own for that one. And then we have Disembark Boosts, which are much more relevant to current strats. Disembark Boosts are performed by holding crouch and forward as you leave a Titan. The resulting boost is extremely useful for getting up to speed following a disembark, and these boosts have a number of uses in both full game categories and ILs. And some common pitfalls to avoid are pressing crouch too early, which results in you just kind of plopping out on the floor in front of your Titan, and disembarking on an angled surface. For whatever reason, you can only get a disembark boost on flat ground, so be careful of that. As I mentioned at the very start of this video, everything in Titanfall 2 influences everything else. Whether or not you ate a lurch affects your slide hop routing for the upcoming segment. The angle you're looking at coming off a Wallkick directly influences the necessary strafe pattern, etc, etc. Titanfall 2 movement is an ensemble performance, and you need to understand every aspect of the movement toolkit to perform at a high level and push the most you can out of the game and your performance. We're going to show off a number of movement sequences that cover several examples of the tech we cover today in combination with one another to illustrate how important just every little thing is. For any of y'all that made it this far, thank you so much for watching. This was a passion project for Zweek and I that we worked on together for 4 months while also trying to coordinate around German and Western US time zones, which wasn't always an easy task. We went through a ton of effort to future-proof this video as much as possible and hope that it'll be a sufficient resource for years to come, or at least until Titanfall's movement gets revolutionized again. I want to personally give a massive shout out to Zweek. While we worked on the video together, the script together, brainstormed ideas for edits and everything like that, we did all that together, he was the one that did the raw editing, and personally I think he did a fantastic job. So thanks dude, I appreciate you from the bottom of my heart. Titanfall 2 is very much a speed game that is still evolving and still getting faster every day. We have a furiously passionate and inclusive community built around it, and we have a lot of cool stuff in the works too. If you'd like to be a part of it, or just watch more of it, be sure to follow Zweek and I on Twitch, sub to us here on YouTube, and join our community Discord. All pertinent links will be in the description. So again, thank you, and until next time, cheers.